Hey, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to show you how to install a 5.5-inch nickel gap shiplap on this wall right here. Floor to ceiling, 10 feet out. It's going to be awesome. Stick around.
Properly preparing the area for any project is one of the most important parts to getting a good finished result, and this project is no exception. So watch this video all the way to the end to get all the tips and tricks so that your friends will think you hired a professional. If you have any switches or outlets on the wall, they will need to be removed before you can install the shiplap. And if you're not comfortable dealing with electricity, then get a professional to do this part for you, safety first. But I am comfortable with electricity, so I tend to leave the power on and just wrap the sides with electrical tape and pull it out of my way. Like I tell my kids, do as I say, not as I do. Next, I cut the caulking along the baseboards and the corners, the wall, and the floor if needed. Then you can measure from the wall to where you want the shiplap to stop, and mark the baseboards with a pencil and a square to give you a straight line. Then put down not one, not two, but 3 layers of duct tape to protect the floors, and then cut the baseboards with a multi-tool if you have one. If you don't have a multi-tool, then you can remove the baseboards and cut them to fit after the shiplap is installed, but a multi-tool will save you time in the end. And if you lightly score the line before trying to cut all the way through the baseboard, it will keep the multi-tool blade from trying to wander outside of your line. Once that's done, you can remove the baseboards, and if you're ending the shiplap in a corner like I am, then take a piece of the shiplap and the trim that you will be using on the floor later and push it against the baseboard in the corner. This will give you the proper thickness and a straight line. Then cut it with a multi-tool using the same method as before. And here's a little DeWalt camera shot. No, this is not a sponsored video. I just tend to like DeWalt tools. And don't forget to remove any old caulking on the walls or floors so the shiplap will lay flat. Remember that if the prep is wrong, the final product will be too, so don't take shortcuts. Now we need to mark the walls where the studs are, so you know where to put the nails. And although my wife thinks she found a stud, she's not here to help. So I'll show you a couple of ways of how I do it. Option 1 is to use an actual stud finder and mark the wall accordingly. This is the easiest way and probably the most accurate. But if you don't have one, or like me, you forgot to put batteries in it, then you'll have to use a different method to find your studs. And for the record, this is not a tutorial on how to find guys. Option number 2 is the time-proven knock-knock method. And no, this is not the beginning of a dad joke. Just knock on the wall until you hear a solid spot, and then hammer in a nail to verify you found a stud and mark the wall with a 4-foot level. Once you have all of the studs marked, it's time to measure the length for your first cut. And if you don't have a miter saw, it's okay. You can use a square and a skill saw to make very straight and square cuts by marking your cut line on the board and placing the square next to the guide on the skill saw, and then make your cut. It's easy peasy, straight cut squeezy. Then the moment we have all been waiting for. It's time to start installing that shiplap. Now I prefer to use an 18 gauge brad nailer with a minimum of a 2-inch nail so that it will penetrate at least 1 inch into the stud. Anything shorter won't have the same holding force and may eventually start coming apart. You can use a 16 gauge nailer if you want to, you'll just have bigger holes to fill later. When you come across your first outlet or switch, you can either hold the board that needs to be cut just below the hole and mark the edges, or in this case, I was able to set the board on the ground and use a square to mark the edges of the hole. Then measure to the bottom and top of the hole, remembering to account for the nickel-sized gap between the pieces of shiplap. That's why they call it nickel gap shiplap. After marking the cut lines, you'll want to drill holes in each corner using a 1/2-inch drill bit. Then cut it out using a jigsaw or multi-tool. After that's done, you can continue installing the shiplap as before. When you are reinstalling the outlet later, remember you will need to use some longer screws because of the added thickness. After that piece is installed, you can now cut the rest of the pieces and the installation will go very quickly. When you get to the last board, you will most likely need to rip it down to size using a table saw, or you can use a circular saw. Once all of the shiplap is installed, you can measure, cut, and install the trim boards. Now, you can use whatever size you want, but I personally liked the look of using trim that is 3/4 of an inch thick by 3.5 inches wide. I used this size on the edges and along the ceiling, but I used a trim that was 5.5 inches tall on the floor to better match the rest of the baseboard height. Just like the prep at the beginning is important, it is even more important with the finishing steps. So here is a quick tip on how to get that professional result. Every time you shoot in a brad nail, it leaves a small area around the head of the nail that is raised, and you can feel it with your fingers. So use a block sander and some 120 grit sandpaper to knock down the surface. Then use a high quality, non-shrinking putty to fill the holes and wipe off the excess with a damp rag. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the details on painting, that's for another video, but make sure you lightly scuff the surface with some 120 grit sandpaper and wipe down the wall with a damp cloth before painting. This will give you that professional finish that you're looking for. And that's it. Thanks for watching.